The Legend of Zelda might be the most beloved video game franchise of all time. No series has earned more 10 out of 10 games than the Green Giant himself. But when you ask people to rank their favorite Zelda games, Phantom Hourglass is never at the top. In fact, it's usually way down at the bottom, right next to stinky ass Skyward Sword. Gross. Now, I played this game as a kid. I never beat it or anything, but I remember liking it a lot. But all this negativity has made me wonder if my enjoyment all came down to childhood nostalgia. So I decided to give the game a revisit myself. And after finally beating it for the first time, I gotta say, I was actually surprised with how much I enjoyed this game. Well, let's start with the first thing you'll notice as soon as you start the game. The controls. Everything here is controlled using the touchscreen. Besides some shortcuts like opening the map, there are 0 button presses required. At first, I was not really keen on this idea. Moving Link around with the stylus felt pretty awkward. There was never enough space on the touchscreen to let me go as fast as I wanted. And trying to attack enemies, especially the ones with a weak spot, was not very intuitive. Over time though, probably 3 hours in, I did get used to the controls. I still prefer button controls over the touchscreen, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. And because this game only uses the touchscreen, it's probably the most accessible Zelda game there is. As long as you can get something on the touchscreen, you can play a full-out Zelda game, and I think that's pretty neat. Well, unless you have asthma, then you might have to go get another person to come blow your DS. Yeah, this is one of those DS games that insists on using the microphone in order to please Daddy Nintendo. Does anyone ever like games that make you do this? From the Wii U making me spit on Captain Toad, and this game giving me a noise complaint just to kill this stupid rat. Luckily, this doesn't happen that often. I can only recall like 4 or 5 times this happened, but it's not making me excited to revisit Spirit Tracks. Now let's talk about the story and presentation. First off, I love Wind Waker era Zelda. The worlds are just so bright and colorful, and I love cel-shaded graphics. These are also the only games where Link isn't an emotionless twink. He actually emotes and has a damn personality. Now I'm sure this guy is a lot of people's fetish, but I'd take goofy Toon Link over that trash any day. Now this game does look like a 3D DS game, not to be confused with a 3DS game. There's something about this 3D art style on the Nintendo DS that just fills me full of joy, and it makes me look past how horribly ugly these games can be. Now the soundtrack here is mostly reused songs from Wind Waker. This is lazy, but I do like those songs a lot, so I give it a pass. The story here, it's just whatever. It's pretty much the exact same plot of every Zelda game. The princess is captured and you gotta get 3 different colored rocks to save her. After that you gotta get 3 more colored rocks to make the Master Sword and go beat the final boss. I appreciate that this game has some continuity with Wind Waker, but besides Tetra and a few references here and there really isn't much to that. I'll also give the game credit for not bringing Ganon into this mess. I was fully prepared for the main villain to be like, aha, it was actually Ganon that was behind this the whole time, but it actually doesn't do that, so credit where credit is due. You also have the dude that shares the main cover of the game with Link, Linebeck. He's this dickhead seaman that only exists for Link to use his ship. He's kind of an asshole at first, but he gets some decent character development that makes him kinda likable. This plot is super unoriginal, but for a Zelda game, it gets the job done. Now the main game is almost this mixture of 2D and 3D Zelda. I find that the combat and the dungeons are very 2D Zelda-like. The dungeons themselves, they're pretty good. The puzzles are clever, the combat's pretty fun, and there weren't any frustrating moments. But I wouldn't call them memorable either. I find that this is an issue with 2D Zelda as a whole. The dungeons end up being very grid-based. Everything looks artificial and there's nothing that really stands out. I find that 3D Zelda dungeons end up looking more natural and a lot more interesting because of it. One thing that's a little disappointing at first is that this game has 0 new items. Every single item here is one that's been in a previous Zelda game. While this is kind of a bummer at first, the touch controls actually bring new life to each of these items. The boomerang lets you draw its path, the grappling hook lets you connect 2 points to make a tightrope, and the hammer is ranged for some reason. Yeah, I'm not sure how that makes any sense, but hey, it makes for a really fun boss fight. Oh yeah, one thing I was not expecting was just how amazing these bosses are. While the dungeons are pretty tame, the bosses go all out with these new ideas. Most of them use the top and the bottom screen, and this makes for some really creative fights. There's this one fight against this crab that for whatever reason can make himself invisible, so you can't see him, but the top screen is actually his point of view. And then you use this to line up your shots with the bow and arrow. Super neat idea. I also love this stone golem that I mentioned earlier. You use the hammer to fling yourself in the air and then go absolutely mental on his weak points. Nothing super mind taxing, but it was a lot of fun. Every single boss here, except maybe the first one, was an absolute home run of a boss fight. None of these bosses beat that Beyblade fight from Twilight Princess, but if you average them all out, I think this game honestly might have the best bosses in the whole series. Besides the boss fights, the other thing that I felt was very 3D Zelda-esque was the overall exploration. Now you explore the ocean Wind Waker style, but instead of that dinky little raft, you have this big ass boat with a cannon on it. The world is divided into 4 quadrants with set islands on each of them. You see the important islands right away, but with some tips from the locals, you can find some secret, uncharted islands. The game lets you draw on the map, and this is used constantly throughout the adventure. When the game tells you something, it doesn't record it itself, it expects you to write that shit down. This leads to some awesome moments while exploring. You'll think you're fully done with an island, and then some dude on another island will tell you that Old Man Jenkins keeps all of his money buried in his front lawn, and will give you a reason to go revisit that previous island. I know this is a meme at this point, but this game makes you really feel like a pirate. Even better is that all of your exploring really leads to some cool stuff. This game actually gets rid of heart pieces and only has full ass heart containers. It replaces heart pieces with these 3 different flavored spirit gems. Once you collect 10 of them, you can go to this island and get a permanent upgrade to one of your stats. You can only equip 1 upgrade at a time, but I think this is a great replacement of the heart pieces. Any steps towards character customization in a Zelda game, I'm all for it. You also find a bunch of treasure maps throughout your adventure. These show you on your sea charts where some buried loot is. You have to do this stressful ass minigame, and your reward is either sand for your hourglass, we'll get to that later, or customizable ship parts. These ship parts are both cosmetic and give your boat some more health depending on how fashionable you are. I really enjoyed the optional exploration in this game. The map was big enough to make me feel like I was on a journey, but not too big to make me feel hopeless. Think Banjo-Kazooie versus Banjo-Tooie. Now I haven't even mentioned the number 1 thing people complain about with this game. The thing that a lot of people claims ruins the entire game for them. That of course being the Temple of the Ocean King. This place is this unique, over-centralizing mega dungeon. You revisit it multiple times to unlock these sea charts that let you progress further in the game. The problem here is that they make you replay earlier sections that you've already done in order to get further in the temple. Replaying earlier sections is pretty annoying, but once you get halfway, you do get a checkpoint. You're also unlocking little shortcuts every time you get a new item. The first half of the dungeon you're only required to play like 2 times, but the second half, they do make you play through it 3 full times. It becomes pretty tiring doing the same puzzles over and over again, and it doesn't help that this whole dungeon is also a pretty bare bones stealth section. Overall, yeah, I definitely think they could have fixed this place and made it way less tedious. But overall, I don't think it's that bad. I never even came close to running out of time here, and in my 19-hour adventure, I only spent about an hour and a half here. Annoying, yes, but it's not nearly as bad as most people make it out to be. So in conclusion, for me, this was like a full-length Zelda game with most of the fat trimmed off, which made it perfect for a handheld console. None of that typical Zelda BS is here, and I actually went the entire game without looking up a single thing. Except for that dumbass ghost ship lever puzzle. The controls do take some time to get used to, and the Temple of the Ocean King can be intimidating. But these slight annoyances do not detract from a game that is insanely charming, clever, and severely underrated.